Good day everyone. So, nanapod ko, Sir James Lisaldares to discuss to you all about the limits of a function. Okay, so this is a basic calculus topic. Okay, so what is a limit of function? So, a limit of a function, L, is the unique real value that f of x will approach as x approaches c. In symbol, inaniyahang pagkasulat. And you read this one as the limit of f or the limit of f of x as x approaches c is L. And there are three approaches in finding the limits of a function. The first one is the numerical approach, or this is also known as the tabular approach. The second one is the graphical approach, and the third one, okay, is the analytical approach. So let's try to solve those three approaches. So first, determine the limit of function x plus 3 as x approaches to 3. So, try na to ang numerical approach. So, use the numbers from left of right of 3. So, for this one, okay, so you notice, nagamit tag 3 ka numbers from 3, buta na to sa sulod, ay sa pinakatunga. Okay, from the left of 3, we use 2, 2.5, and 2.9. And from the right of 3, you have the 3.1, 3.5, and 4. Okay, so let's evaluate this one, okay, except for 3. Okay, so use substitution method to get the value of each function except for x equals 3. So for f of 2, okay, so if x is 2, you have f of 2 is 2 plus 3, which is 5. F of 2.5, you have the 2.5 plus 3 equals 5.5, and so on. Okay. So, for the right side, the same. You have f of 3.1, you have the 3.1 plus 3 equals 6.1. And 3.5, you have the 3.5 plus 3, 6.5. And 4 plus 3 is, okay, this is critical error, this is 7. Okay, so let me correct this one. Not a clerical error. Okay, yeah, this is 7. Okay, so these are the values of your f of x. Okay, if you notice, okay, from the left of 3 and from the right of 3, okay, maklaro nato kung asa nga number padulong if exactly 3 siya without solving or without finding the value of the f of 3. If you notice from the left, from 5 to 5.9, and from the right side you have the 7 to 6.1. Okay, asa ka sila pagkita. Okay, so ma-check na to nga the answer is padulong jud sila sa 6, diba? So, therefore, the limit of x plus 3 as x approaches 3 is equal to 6. So, as x approaches to 3, okay, so kung gapaduol daw ta sa 3, okay, asa daw gapadulong ato ang f of x. So, that is our limit. The second one is the graphical approach. Okay, so let's try to use the values. Okay, so let me correct this one. 3 ni siya. Okay, dayon na-evaluate na nato ni kaganiha, which is this is 7. Okay, para mas dali ni siya, okay, you can use the Desmos app. There are many apps sa graphical method, okay, or any graphing app sa Play Store, but I would suggest Desmos inyong gamiton. Okay, grabe siya kagamit. Okay, you can explore the functions of the Desmos, okay, after you downloaded it. So if you download the Desmos, okay, and if you plot the f of x equals x plus 3, you can have this graph, this straight line. Okay, as x approaches to 3, okay, Diya punta. As x approaches to 3, the question this time is unsay value sa to ang y. Okay, as x approaches to 3, in this one, asa gapadulong atong y. So clearly, padulong siya sa 6. So it follows the limit of x plus 3 as x approaches to 3 is 6. Okay. So, see, graphical approach is more on observation of the graph. Okay. So, this is the last one is the analytical approach. So, in analytical approach, you can use any algebraic method to solve the value of f of x. Okay. So, the limit of f of x as x approaches c is equivalent to the limit of x plus 3 as x approaches to 3. For this one, you can only use substitution. Okay. Pinakasayon is substitution. So, as x approaches to 3, so, once you can use substitution, kindly substitute lang. Okay, so you have the 3 plus 3, and you have the 3 plus 3 is 6, thus, the limit of x plus 3 as x approaches to 3 is 6. Okay, di ba sayin kayo, substitution? Okay, so, substitution method is the mostly used in solving the limit of function by analytical approach. If it is not solvable by substitution method, try another algebraic methods such as factoring and other simplifying methods. So, let's discuss some basic limits. Okay, so let b and c be real numbers and let n be a positive integer. So, here is the first basic limit. So, this is the limit of a constant. So, the limit of b as x approaches c is equal to b. Okay, so any limit of a constant is equal to the constant. So you have the limit of a constant 5 as x approaches 3 is equal to the 5 itself. Another is the limit of x as x approaches c. Okay, katotong na discuss kaganiya. Pag nanay variable nga x, okay, as x approaches to any number, kindly substitute the values of x sa katong gina-approach na natong number. So, for example, the limit of x as x approaches to 4, so you can substitute this 4 sa atong x, so you have equals 4. The third one is the limit of x to the power of n as x approaches c is equal to c to the power of n. So, similarly, you can substitute this one. Okay, so you have the limit of x cubed as x approaches 2, so you can substitute 2 dari. Oh, sorry. So you have the 2 cubed, and we already know that 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, so you have 8. Okay, so this time, let's try to solve the do it yourself, okay, using the 3 basic limits. Okay, so say for example, the limit of 3 as x approaches to 2. Okay, clearly the limit of a constant 3 is equal to itself, which is 3 Japon. The second one is the limit of x as x approaches to negative 4. So similarly, you can use substitution. You have negative 4. And the third one, the limit of x squared as x approaches to 3. You can also use substitution. When x is 3, you have the 3 squared. 3 squared is equivalent to 9. So another theorem is the theorem 1.2, which are the properties of limits. So for this one, let b and c be real numbers and let n be a positive integer and let f and g be functions with the limits. So the limit of f as x approaches to c, okay, so it doesn't necessarily a negative. Okay. The same way, limit of the g as x approaches to c, okay, is equivalent to k. So, it doesn't necessarily nga negative c na siya. So, any constant nga c. So, these are the limits. So, first is the scalar multiple. So, if you have, for scalar multiple, if you have a scalar number or a constant number, pwede rin mo i-multiply na siya after you find the limit. For the sum and difference, okay, for the sum and difference, if the operation is addition and subtraction, okay, pwede rin ninyo find the limit of the first term, plus or minus, dayon another finding the limit of the second term, ay add ninyo i-add or minus. The same with the product. If there are two functions, okay, f and g, okay, so you can solve for the limit first, ay add ninyo i-multiply ang ilahang limits, which is L times K na ito na yun. Same with quotient, okay, and for the power, PEMDAS, una. So, inside the parentheses, find the limit first, and you can, ano na yun, kanang evaluate kung unsa yung exponent. The same with the radical. So, let's try to solve the do-it-yourself. Okay. So, for number 1, the limit of the 2x to the power 4 as x approaches to 3. Okay. So, this is a combination of a scalar multiple kinaatay coefficient or a scalar number, okay, beside the function x to the power 4. And also, this is a power kay naa siya exponent nga to the power 4. Okay? So, first, by property scalar of the scalar multiple nga limits, pwede ra nato ilahidaan si 2. Okay? And also, si x nato is 3 and to the power of 4. Okay. Actually, this property is only guide kanitanan. But the most basic is katong substitution. Okay. Kung mo substitute, okay, kung ma-substitute, that's all. Kung unsa inyo ma-evaluate mo na din ang limit. So, for this one, 3 to the power 4 is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. You have the 81. So, you have the 2 times 81. And the 2 times 81 is 190. Okay, sorry. 162. Okay, so, di maklaro na. Okay, so, let me erase this one. So, you have the 162. Okay. Another example is the limit of 5x times 3x minus 7 as x approaches 5. Okay. So, mahalag din nato tanawan ng properties. If you can use the substitution method, you have the 5 times 5. Okay, then 3 times 5 minus 7. Algebraic method means first evaluate what is inside the parentheses. So katong kani siya. Okay, evaluate na siya, evaluate po ni siya, separate, kaya separate man po niya group. You have the 5 times 5 is 25. Then 3 times 5 is 15 minus 7, you have the 8. And 25 times 8 is 200. Okay, so this is now your limit of the function number 2 as x approaches 5. Okay, let's try another. Okay, so this time this is a rational, okay, function which falls into the quotient rule. For the quotient rule, okay, notice, find the limit of a rational function is the limit of the numerator divided by the limit of the denominator. So that is clearly, evaluate ra nimo Substitute this 1 sa numerator, substitute this 1 sa denominator. So you have the 1 squared plus 1 plus 2 all over 1 plus 1. So the 1 squared plus 1 plus 2, that is exactly 4 divided by 2. So 4 divided by 2, so the answer is 2. Okay, di ba? Sayun ra. Okay. But there are some cases that the function is dili siya maka-direct substitution diretso. So finding the limit of it takes time. Okay, so there are strategies. Okay, so one strategy in finding the limit of function is to learn to recognize which limit can be evaluated by direct substitution, which is katong mga example sa to kaganiya. The other one is when the limit of f of x or the limit of f cannot be evaluated by direct substitution, simplify or change the form of the function so that it can be evaluated using substitution. You can use any algebraic properties or methods. Okay, so say for example this one. Solve for the limit of x squared minus 1 as x approaches 1. So if we use direct substitution, if we substitute all x by 1, so in aning mahitabo. So 1 squared minus 1 and 1 minus 1. So you have the 0 over 0, which is undefined or in limits that is called does not exist. Okay? So dili ka maka-direct substitution. But if we simplify the function by factoring the numerator, you notice the numerator here is factorable. X squared minus 1 is a difference of 2 squares, okay, which is equivalent to the limit of x minus 1 times x plus 1 all over x minus 1 as x approaches to 1. So this time, numerator and denominator, okay, kay naay x minus 1 yung factor. And you already know that x minus 1 over x minus 1 or any number divided by itself is equal to 1. And that is identity. Any number multiplied by 1 is equal to itself. So consider this is 1. 1 times x plus 1 is simply x plus 1 na lang. Okay, identity man ni siya. So they have the limit of x plus 1 as x approaches to 1. You can now use substitution. So 1 plus 1. So clearly the limit is 2. So the limit of x squared minus 1 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1 is equal to 2. Okay, so pangitaan nimo pa maagi para makasubstitute ka. Okay. Another do it yourself. Okay, so the limit, okay, so para mag-justify na to nga same ra katong properties nga ma-undefined ang denominator, let's change this 1 by 2. So this is example number 20 something sa inyong worksheet. So you have the limit of the 3x cubed minus 6x squared all over x minus 2 as x approaches to 2. Okay. So if you notice, if we use direct substitution, ma-undefined yun ang denominator. Okay, di ba? 2 minus 2 sa denominator will become 0 and any number divided by 0 is undefined or undeterminate. So this time, let's use factoring. Okay, what is common between the two functions sa numerator? Okay, clearly, common sila between 3 and 6. Common sa ilaha is the number 3. Okay, si 3 and 6 can be divided by 3. For the variable nga x cubed and x squared, we can both divide them by x squared. Okay, so you have the 3x cubed divided by 3x squared. Ang mabili na lang kay x. Okay, copy the negative sign. 6x squared divided by 3x squared. You have naman. Okay, so that is clearly mabili na lang 2. Okay, kung i-check ninyo, 3x squared times x, you have the 3x cubed and the 3x squared times negative 2, negative 6x squared, which is clearly equivalent sa itong numerator kaganina. Okay, so sorry na limit ko sulat sa limit. So limit of function as x approaches to. So the denominator is copy lang. If you notice, the numerator and denominator is na ay value nga x minus 2. And again, this is equivalent to 1. Diba? Any number divided by itself is equal to 1 except for 0. Okay, 0 over 0 is indeterminate na. So, ang mabili na lang is the limit of the 3x squared as x approaches 2. And you can now use direct substitution. So you have the 3, okay, 2 squared, okay, 2 squared is 4, 4 times 3, you have 12. Another example is this one. Okay, so this is much more complicated nga rational compared ka ganiha. Okay, the limit of the function as x approaches to 3. Okay, if you use direct substitution, for the denominator, 3 minus 3 is undefined na dayon siya. Okay, kay 0 man ang denominator, so the function itself is an undefined. So, for this one, you can use factoring sa Japon. So, the limit of, okay, the denominator is x minus 3, okay, as x approaches to 3. Pinakadali, para ma-check ninyo kung nabay the same factors sa numerator and denominator. So, let's assume nga naapoy x minus 3 sa numerator para mawala ang denominator ng x minus 3. Okay, para mas dali ang pag-factor ninyo. So, for this one, if you notice, this is x. Okay, for x squared ba na siya? Okay, what number, okay, or what term ang atong i-multiply sa x para mahimo siyang 4x squared? Okay, so that is clearly 4x. Okay, 4x times x is 4x squared. The same with negative 15. Kung sa itong i-multiply sa negative 3 para mahimo negative 15. So that is clearly 5. Para ma-check if these two factors kay equivalent sa tuang trinomial kaganiya. So, negative 3 times 4, x is negative 12x. And 5 times x, so you have the 5x. If you add this one, 5x minus 12x. So, clearly, this is equivalent sa negative 7x. So, you notice, this one, numerator nga x minus 3 all over denominator nga x minus 3 is simply equal kang 1 again. So, this is identity. So, mabili na lang is you have the limit of 4x plus 5. Don't forget to put parentheses as x approaches to 3. So, you can use substitution. So, you have the 4 times 3 plus 5. Okay. So, you have the 4 times 3 is 12 plus 5, 17. Therefore, naanamoy limit. Okay, so another limits are the limits of the trigonometric functions. So, let's see be any real number. So, these are the 6 trigonometric functions and their limit. So, the limit of sine of x as x approaches to c is equivalent to sine c or equal to sine c. As you notice, the same na Japon siya o concept. You need to substitute lang c in all x. Okay, so sine x, okay, as x approaches to c is equivalent to sine c. The same with cosine, tangent, and so on. Okay, so let's answer 1b. So do it yourself. Actually, this is na siya sa yata 2a. Okay, so the limit of tangent x as x approaches to pi. Okay, if you deal with trigonometric functions, you can use your scientific calculator and make sure, okay, nga dapat radian mode. ang inyong scientific calculator. Okay? So there are two types of angle, the degree and the radian. Okay, so majority in solving kasagaran naka-radian mode man na siya. So dapat inyong calculator po is naka-radian mode. Okay, so for this one, okay, so the limit of tangent x as x approaches to pi is the same as the tangent of pi. Okay, you need to substitute pi sa x. But the question, what is the tangent pi? If you use your calculator, okay, na may makita diyan nga function, the tangent of pi is equivalent to 0. So the limit of tangent x as x approaches to pi is 0. And inalang na siya. Okay. So yun siya kung naman scientific calculator actually. Okay. The limit of cosine 3x as x approaches to pi. So this is equivalent to cosine of 3 pi. So sa inyong calculator, just put the cosine and 3 pi and your answer is equal to -1. Okay. So the third one is the limit of secant 2x as x approaches 0. Okay. So this is equivalent to secant of 2 times 0. Okay. So or this is equivalent to secant of 0. Diba? Kay 2 times 0 is 0 man. But you notice, sa inyong scientific calculator, walay secant. So there are only sine, cosine, and tangent. And we all know that secant is equivalent to 1 over cosine. So secant 0 is equivalent to 1 over cosine 0. So i-evaluate ninyo. Cosine 0 is 1. So you have the 1 over 1 is equivalent to 1. Okay. So that is for the limits of the trigonometric function. Another limits are the limits of transcendental functions. So, nadari, the limit of e to the power of x as x approaches 0 is 1. The limit of ln of x as x approaches 1 is 0. The limit of log of x as x approaches 1 is 0. And the limit of sine of x as x approaches 0 is 0. Okay, so let's try. Okay, so let's have a combine. Okay, wala ni siya sa inyong hangouts or sa inyong worksheets kay wala na ako na encode di ay. Wala ako na save. So, let's have this example. The limit of 4e to the power of x as plus 2 sine x as x approaches 0 is, okay, if you notice, if we use direct substitution, so this is 4e to the power of 0 plus 2 sine to the power of 0. Okay, so di man siya undefined, so you can use direct substitution. We already know that e to the power of 0 is equivalent to 1. Any number to the power of 0 is equal to 1. And this is supported also by the theorem 1. The limit of e to the power of x as x approaches 0 is 1. So this is clearly equal to 1. So you have the 4 times 1 plus 2. Okay. The limit of sine x as x approaches 0 kanisya, is equal to 0. Okay. Or if you can use, you can support this one using your calculator. Sine of 0 is also equivalent to 0. So clearly this is 4 times 1 is 4 plus 0. So the answer is 4. The next example is the limit of 3 log x as x approaches to 1. Okay, so notice, pwede natin pakita, you have the 3. Okay, so you can use substitution, but using the theorem, the log of x as x approaches to 1 is 0. So this is the limit except for 3. Okay, so the limit of log of x as x approaches to 1 is 0. So you have the 3 times 0. So this is equivalent to 0. Okay, you can support that one using your calculator. Okay? So, for your calculator, notice may error siya. Okay? But since that is a function man, direct substitution. Okay? But since in terms of the limits, we observe kung unsa asa padulong ang limits nato from the left and from the right. Okay, from the left from the right padulong siya sa 0. Not exactly at x equals 1, diba? So the limit of log of x is 0. Okay, times 3 times 0 is 0. Okay. The third one is the limit of ln of x divided by 4 minus x as x approaches 1. Okay, so if we use direct substitution, notice 4 minus 1, if we substitute this 1 sa toang x, dili man siya man-define. So you can use direct substitution. So this is ln of x, or ln of 1 over 4 minus 1. Okay. ln of 1, you can evaluate using a calculator, is equivalent to 0. So this is supported by the second theorem. The limit of ln of x as x approaches 1 is 0. So muna sa 0. Divided by 4 minus 1, 3. 0 divided by 3, this is equivalent to 0. Okay, and lastly, okay, basta mga tanong mo, kinsa na si lastly, ha? Okay, so some special limits. So the limit of sine x over x as x approaches 0 is 1. The limit of 1 minus cosine x divided by x as x approaches 0 is 0. And the limit of e to the power of x minus 1 all over x as x approaches 0 is 1. Okay. So, first, let's try this one. The limit of 3 to the power of the limit of 3e to the power of x minus 3 all over x as x approaches 0 is, okay, saan na pag-answer? So, this is clearly dili jud exactly parehas, ano to, no? But you notice, the numerator, it involves e to the power of x. So, na may hint daan nga, it involves the third theorem sa special limits. So, kung sa kay buhaton na to? Okay, so you notice factorable si 3. Okay, so ilahi na to daan si 3. Okay, so 3e to the power of x divided by 3, so ang mabili na lang is e to the power of x minus 3 divided by negative 3 divided by 3, so you have the negative 1. Okay, all over x as x approaches 0. Okay, remember kagani we discussed that any scalar, okay, any scalar or constant, pwede nato na siya pagawas. So you have, instead nga diha si 3, pagawas na to si 3, you have the 3 limit of e to the power of x minus 1 all over x as x approaches 0. So this is itong properties of limits, scalar multiple. Okay, and this one, the 3, okay, you have the 3, the limit of e to the power of x minus 1 all over x as x approaches 0 is property special limits number 3. This is equivalent kang 1. And we already know that 3 times 1 is also equal kang 3. And that is the limit. Okay, the second one is the limit of 1 minus cosine x, okay, as x approaches 0. Okay, so nabasa? Okay, nabasa kaparihas dito sa numerator. Okay, so this is a one special. If you notice, sin x to siya dapat na ay variable nga x. Dito 1 minus cosine x na po yung variable nga x, diba? So what will happen? Okay, so for this one, since it involves sin x and 1 minus cosine x nga to ang function, pwede man na ito na bulagon. So you have the limit of Okay. Bulagan nato into two functions. So that is si sine x, that is si 1 minus cosine x. Okay, so same, di ba? So para si 1 minus cosine x, but nga nako x diha para magamit nako ang ika-second special limits. Since nagbutang kog denominator nga x, para the same rag value magbutang po kog numerator nga x. Okay, nagets niyo? So since x divided by x is equal to 1 and any number multiplied by 1 is equal to itself. So the same run jud na sila og value aning ato ang original function. And since this is a multiple, okay, multiple properties of limits, so the limit of the first term times the limit of the second term. So this is also equivalent to the limit of x over sine x as x approaches 0 times, okay, for multiplication you can use center dot, okay, times the limit of 1 minus cosine of x as, okay, over x as x approaches 0. So this is katong property sa multiplication. Okay. But you notice this first kani siya x over sine x is balira adto, di ba? Okay. So remember your discussion sa una sa inyong junior high katong negative exponent. If we saan siya? Exchange the numerator and denominator, so in negative lang exponent. So you have the limit of sine x over x this time, since positive 1 man ang exponent dito, in negative lang, negative 1 as x approaches 0 times the limit of 1 minus cosine of x over x as x approaches 0. And we already know that sine x over x nga limit as x approaches 0 is equivalent to 1 using property number 1. But nasa yung negative exponent, 1 to the power of negative 1 times the limit of 1 minus cosine x over x, property number 2, is equivalent to 0. And any number multiplied by 0 is equivalent to 0. And that is the answer. Okay, so we are done. So solve the provided activity sheets. Akong gihatag sa inyo, ha? Okay, thank you for listening. Again, this is Sir James Ray Saladares. See you next time. Thank you.